Okay, awesome, wonderful. Well,
Where are you, Ben?
I'm in Oxfordshire. Where are you?
I'm at the Institute of Ophthalmology at University College London.
Brilliant. Well, that's where you spend most of your time these days. Am I correct in saying
Sadly, yes.
that? So, did your research into the eye, I guess, spike the interest in red light? How did the interest in red and sort of different wave lengths of light come about?
It came about originally because I was asked to review a paper, and I looked at this paper and I thought, I don't understand a word of this. And it was one of the first papers on red light. And the next reaction was I didn't believe it. But then when I read it, I thought, these people who did this research are really solid. They're really solid. The inadequacy is in me. And that's where it started to roll. And I did a few simple experiments myself, and it confirmed that something was happening. There was something here. And really, over the last 12 years, this has grown, and it's grown from being, what should we say, an academic interest to us running it all the way through into clinical trials. So it's been an interesting organic development of a subject from me working on flies to now working on people and kids. Yeah,
it's a really interesting field because I think you have all these health nerds who buy the massive red lights and near-infrared lights, but yet don't quite know why. I mean, I bought one back in 2021, and if anyone asked me why have you bought this, I wouldn't be able to give them an answer. But saying that, when my friends come around and see my red light, they think, why the red light? Why the near-infrared? To start with, can we understand the relationship, or could you help us understand the relationship between mitochondria and light?
Yeah, sure. Now, the area of mitochondria and mitochondria research is very much the area of kind of people who are quite technical biochemists. And so they go into mitochondria, they rip them apart, they look at what's inside the machinery. I come from it from a different perspective because I don't know any biochemistry. That's not my area. So we tend to treat them as black boxes. So we do something to them and something happens, and we don't worry too much about the middle ground. I think that when it comes to biology in general, if you take plants out of the equation and you take eyes out of the equation, people are very unhappy looking at light and biology. Right? So if we look about skin cell or we look at something like that, people are not very, very comfortable. But one of the issues at stake here is that mitochondria are very, very light sensitive. And that was known a long time ago, but seems to have got a little bit lost. And what is critical for us is that light can regulate what mitochondria do. And mitochondria regulate your metabolism, and they also regulate your pace of aging. So, they do rather a lot of things. And if we've got a spanner that can actually be used to crack mitochondria, that actually is very, very important. So that's how I came in. I am an outsider as far as a lot of the mitochondrial people are concerned, but no, very, very few people look at mitochondria as black boxes.
I guess, I get the mitochondria sort of heavy hitters, your Nick Lanes and those types, I imagine. The looking at a black box, I think, is a lovely way to frame the discussion because you don't need to know the intricacies of what goes on inside the mitochondria, right? As you said, something happens, light, black box, something happens, come out. So what is the effect of different spectrums of light to mitochondria?
Okay, so I always use the analogy that let's view mitochondria as a battery with a charge. And it is a battery and it does have a charge. But with aging and with disease, the battery runs down. The mitochondria regulate aging. So it happens that long wavelengths of light mitochondria respond to them by charging a battery that is actually in a poor state. So it can be a poor state through aging, it can be in a poor state because of metabolic disease. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, look at the sort of the short wavelengths, the blue discharges the battery. It reduces the charge on the battery. And as you reduce the charge on the battery, you can imagine like an old car battery, as it runs down, it starts to leak acid. In this case, it produces something called reactive oxygen species. And what that does is it drives inflammation, right? So our battery runs down, we get old, we don't have the energy to kick our legs out of bed in the way that we used to. And at the same time, we start to get inflammation because the battery's leaking acid. So that's the kind of the simple basics of it. I mean, we can talk a lot about what is it in the mitochondria that are absorbing the light. And I think we pretty much identified that now, giving us a sort of good grounding. For me, the most important thing is driving that forward to an application. You know, what can we do? What can we do with people with mitochondria that don't work very well? What can we do with people who are old? I mean, at the end of the day, we all get old. And many diseases are embedded in mitochondrial function. And so macular degeneration, Parkinson's disease is fundamentally a mitochondrial disease. So we've got lots of applications we can move towards if we feel secure about them.
Definitely. I'm looking at my script right now, and I want to stay on topic, but part of me wants to deviate and ask loads of tangents and sort of the different imbalances in mitochondria and what that has implications for. Specifically, I read a book last week called The Metabolic Theory of Cancer by Thomas Jeffery. I don't know if you've come across it.
No, I haven't come across that.
Essentially, it's a theory where cancer is coming about as a result of the defect mitochondria, which downstream of that creates all sorts of cancer stuff. But we won't go there yet. To frame the discussion, I'd love to understand and just sort of set the parameters up of what different light waves do we get from the sun? Because I think when you say light, everyone is used to sort of the incandescent bulbs that get in the home, the different spectrums of light they get in the sun. And then from there, maybe we can sort of zoom in on near-infrared and red light.
Yeah, so sunlight, and I really am going to sell the point to kick off with. You've evolved, life has evolved for billions of years under sunlight. Light is the energy that drives evolution. So sunlight, you could very crudely say, runs from the ultraviolet that we can't see, 350, 320 nanometers, and then it runs all the way out to around 2000 nanometers. So it's a really wide spectrum, but we only see a really small window of that spectrum. So we only see from about 400 nanometers to about 700 nanometers. So sunlight's out here, we see this bit. And because we only see a small part of it, that's the bit we tend to pay attention to, and we don't pay attention to a lot of the other stuff. Now, we've evolved under sunlight, and and firelight is very similar to sunlight in its spectrum. So you could think, well, as we've evolved, we've got fires. And then when we developed light in the built environment, we developed incandescent light bulbs, which are the ones that get hot, which are very eco-unfriendly at the moment. But they give off a very wide spectrum of light as well. So even though we've moved in houses and into buildings, for a period of time, we did have light that was rather like sunlight. And of course, that changed when we moved over to LEDs, because they have got an extremely restricted wavelength of spectrum that we're exposed to.
So, okay, so that is it's really helpful to know. So just to get on the same page, for the listener who's not familiar with all the different implications of light, the sun is almost this sort of cocktail of different light spectrums. We can only see a select few spectrums, but there's many, and we're born to be exposed to these different light spectrums, but we spend 92% of our time indoors. Bulbs can mess with how we're meant to be evolved, and that can cause all sorts of issues, to my understanding. Why so much attention on specifically the red and near-infrared spectrums of light at the moment?
It's because of, it's about recharging that battery. We know they recharge the battery. Let's put it into a wider context, which is we're living much longer. Right, so first of all, we're coming under threat in terms of lifestyle because we're living too long. You know, if we were knocking about in the savannah in Africa, we'd probably be, probably been making 35 or 40 years. We're not now. The average life expectancy in the UK is about 82 years. So the battery is already in very, very poor condition because of lifespan extension. And then also, we're surviving disease because medicine is helping us survive disease. So that's putting us all in a very, very difficult situation. So, and another thing that most people don't take into account is that in modern buildings, our glass blocks infrared light. So we're blocking the sunlight element that is very, very helpful to us, which is infrared. And we do that because you want to control the internal temperature of the building. And if we let infrared light in, buildings get hot. So we're inside. We're not getting any infrared from our lighting anymore. We're blocking the infrared lighting in our glass in modern buildings. So we have an infrared crisis. Now, Bob Fosbury, my colleague, draws the analogy with scurvy. Scurvy is a disease that you get because you don't get enough vitamin C. You get a disease because something is absent. So he draws the analogy, I think, very, very correctly with red light starvation. We are in a situation of red light starvation. So hence this interest in red light. We're all kind of scurrying around saying, red light, yeah, maybe we should be getting some red light. But at the same time, you're correct, we need a rationale. What is the rationale for this? What is our target? What are our devices? What do we want to do with it? So we are in a situation of red light starvation.
It's a really bizarre. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this because you're so close to it. But this year specifically, I've gone from knowing nothing about light to suddenly I still know nothing, but I understand this crisis and feel I've got to do something about it. So I'm spending more time consciously and reading your papers and speaking to you. If we start with some understanding of the wavelengths between red light. So how far can red light specifically penetrate the body?
Well, okay, so the longer the wavelength, the deeper the penetration. And this isn't published yet, but it will be published shortly. So again, my colleague Bob Fosbury, who's fundamentally an astronomer, said, Glen, I think some of this red light can go through your body. So we lined up a whole group of individuals on a sunny day outside the back of the Institute of Ophthalmology, and we got them to take their shirts off, and we put some instrumentation on their back, and we can measure sunlight coming through your body. Now, the bit that comes out at the other end is pretty small, very small, but that does demonstrate that those deep red wavelengths, which are beyond the range that you can see, about 850, they're penetrating your body. When you're walking down the street, they're penetrating your body. And clothes don't stop them unless you're wearing rubber or metal. So those wavelengths of light penetrating straight through the body. So if you think about deep organs of your body, they're being exposed to long wavelengths of light if you're outside.
Wow. It's quite hard to get your head around. So
yeah, it is.
As a result, it can penetrate the body and stimulate the mitochondria in any sort of cell, skin, you name it, right?
Well, no, you don't have to be pale skinned. Some of the people we measured it in are people who, are Afro-Caribbean. So what we do with this is, we work out which wavelengths they are, and they tend to be the longer ones. But we then take people into laboratory settings where, with those wavelengths, we expose them to those wavelengths, and then we test their vision. And we find that and vision is highly dependent on mitochondria. And we find if we expose them to those wavelengths, we recharge the batteries in their eyes, and we can get their visual function to improve.
Wow.
So sunlight is important for lots of metabolic processes. It's important for high energy demanding processes like your visual system. We know if we expose insects to long wavelength red light, their mobility improves. So older flies and older bees have a greater degree of mobility if we pump their mitochondria up. So
Wow.
it has a very wide effect. Now, if we look at things like flies are very cheap. It's very easy to do experiments with flies. And you can ask them to do things like, can you remember this? Can you do this? We find that older flies who have got memory deficits and have got problems with how they walk around and understand their world, we get an improvement with long wavelength light. So all of this is seated in the situation of aging. We get these improvements in aging flies. We get these improvements primarily in aging individuals. You can get them in younger ones as well. And if you remember, some of the unfortunate things that are happening in public health now is we have aging populations, but we have an explosion in diseases of aging populations, such as diabetes, Parkinson's disease, and macular degeneration.
So much on tap there. So would that be all under the, I guess, the bracket of the mitochondrial theory of aging?
Yeah, a lot of it would. And now that theory of aging, which, oh God, it's really old now. It's terribly old. I don't think that Harman, I don't know if Harman is still alive or not. I'd love to take him out for a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are many theories of aging. The mitochondrial theory of aging sticks to the wall really well. The basic process that he talked about mitochondria failing to produce enough energy, and then starting to produce pro-inflammatory things like reactive oxygen species. He was spot on, absolutely spot on.
Well, there seems to be some parallels with the ketogenic diet of a lot of the benefits of the ketogenic diet for things like cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's and dementia, and epilepsy and things. Apparently, is the mechanism is down to it makes you more mitochondrially healthy. A quick question on the eye. When you said that when they're exposed to red light in the eye, is the retina really mitochondrial dense? Is there lots of mitochondria there, or is it just...
So your photoreceptors in your retina have got more mitochondria than any other cell in your body. Now, your retina burns more energy than any other part of your body. It burns more energy than your muscles. It burns more energy than your heart. It burns more energy than your liver. It is in we talk about it as being on a metabolic cliff. It is in a very dangerous situation, because if you burn lots of energy, you generate lots of rubbish, right? So that dustbin is filling up because you're burning lots of energy. The retina is unique in that respect. And yeah, retina is incredibly energy dependent. And that made life very easy for me, because when I came into this field, I came in as a retinal person. And so my home territory was completely fertile for trying to attack this problem.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense. So you came to this through the retina, which is one of the most mitochondrial packed places, and then that gives you this sort of mechanism of red light in, black box mitochondria, recharged energy out.
Yeah. To be honest with you, anyone that makes that story more complicated is pulling wool over your eyes.
Really? Well, this music to my ears, because I can roughly understand that, at least. So that's with the retina. Looking at sort of other interventions, I really enjoyed your paper on the effects on insulin. Could you walk us through how that paper came about? And then maybe we just talk about sort of how does red light affect insulin?
Okay, so this was down to one of my colleagues, Mike Powner, and we're beginning to realise that mitochondria rule lots of other things. Right? There's lots of things we don't know about, but we know that mitochondria, they themselves demand energy, and that energy is glucose and oxygen. So Mike and I were on a long drive to go and do a piece of research somewhere else, and Mike said to me, if we make mitochondria work harder, then in theory, they're going to need more sugar, and the only place they can get it from is your serum. And this was a bit of a revelation. It's, you only have these conversations when you're sitting there and you've got a long period of just mind rolling. So I said, well, I'm not taking a risk on that. So Mike then said, because we'd always been working on and off on bees, he said, well, why don't we do it on bees? Oh, God, sampling blood in bees and blah, blah, blah. But we had a bit of experience there. So what Mike and I did was we took some bees, we gave them a blood glucose tolerance test, which is lots of people have had them. But what we do is we just starve the bee overnight. So then you give the bee a big drop of glucose, and of course the bee goes, and its blood glucose level, or the equivalent of blood, hemolymph, went woof, right, really, really high. So we did two horrible things to the bee. Some bees we gave them a big burst of red light, and the other bees we gave them a big burst of blue light. So one with the red light, we're making their mitochondria work hard. And with the red light, with the blue light, we're slowing their mitochondria down, and it had a direct effect on their blood glucose levels. So we knew from that model, and everything with mitochondria, if it works in a fly, it tends to work in a human. So we knew proof of principle, right? Proof of principle, it worked. So then we got ethical permission. We got a whole group of people in, and it was a horrible experiment. You stick a tube up people's noses to measure their CO2, because if you're burning more oxygen, you'll kick out more CO2. And we're pricking their fingers every few minutes, and then we're asking them to drink the most disgusting pile of glucose. You really know who your friends are when you need subjects like this. And it came out so well. I said to Mike, I want the whole lot replicated. Let's just put all the data aside. Let's start again with a different group of people. Let's replicate the whole thing. And we did, and it was one of those perfect experiments. The replication came out exactly the same as in the first experiment. So red light can reduce blood glucose by making your mitochondria drink more glucose that they take from your serum. Now, these were ordinary, healthy people, including some of my relatives. But Mike has now gone on to do it with type 2 diabetics. And I have seen early signs of that data, and it looks great. Right? So, and with that, we were shining red light on a region of people's backs for about 15 minutes. I think we could do better. I think we can give less light, shorter time periods, and get the same effect. Now, a natural question from this is, shining light on a little bit of someone's back, small proportion of the body area. Why are mitochondria all over the place consuming more sugar? And the thing is that if you manipulate mitochondria in one part of the body, the story gets out. Mitochondria are talking to one another right across the body. We know that from a number of experiments that have been done ages ago, where people would manipulate mitochondria in one bit of an animal, and then they'd see them change the following day over here. No one really had a great idea as to what was going on. But of course, you can't have metabolism changing in one place and not the other. So we did find in animal experiments, the moment we hit them with a burst of red light, a signal changes in the blood. And that signal is something called cytokines, and they're very often associated with inflammation, but they're also signaling molecules. So mitochondria are affected by the red light. They change their metabolism, and they leave a message that goes out, and that message goes out to mitochondria in other parts of the body that do not receive the red light, and those mitochondria change and come into line with the ones that were exposed.
Wow.
Sorry,
go on. So I was just saying, so you wouldn't have to, there wouldn't be any argument for, say, the stomach over the back, because it's not centralized. It spans out for the whole body.
Yeah. So I had a dream which we talked about with the team. I said, wouldn't it be, this was before all this came out, I said, wouldn't it be fantastic if you went to the hole in the wall to take your money out? When you did that, you used your hand as an identifier. So you put your hand down. as a unique identifier. And then while you were doing that, you were getting a burst of red light while you're waiting for your money to come out. Now, that was a dream ticket. It's not a dream ticket anymore. That's doable. That is doable. There are other people in other labs exposing different parts of the body and getting effects in completely different regions, right? So I don't have to shine stuff in your eye. I don't have to do something which you're going to find uncomfortable or awkward. We just need to expose one part of your body, and if we wait 24 hours, we'll get it to kick in.
Wow. I wonder what the minimum effective dose is, because the back's quite a big area, right? Like I guess my question is, how much could you shrink that down? What's the threshold where you could shrink it down to actually get the same effect?
Okay, really good question. Now, I can't answer you in terms of area, but I can answer you in terms of time. So if we go back to our bees, remember what we find in a bee, we very often find in normally find in a human. If I take the time down I take the time down to 3 minutes. Fine, everything works as well as if it was 15 minutes. If I take the time down to under 1 minute, nothing happens. Now, what is interesting here is this is not a dose response curve. It's not like I've got a hangover, I'll take 15 aspirin because it's better than 1. This is a switch. Everything that people have found in this area indicates it is a switch, so that we are doing something and maybe an enzyme's being released, proteins being released, and that is the key thing. Now, when it comes to energy, the amount of energy you might need in that red light, again, that is coming down. So a study that was done in Moorfields Eye Hospital on improving retinal function showed that, well, they did an experiment and we gave them the devices to do it, and the devices ran on batteries. And when the batteries came back, I said to them, you've not changed the batteries. The batteries are underperforming. And then when we looked at the data, we found that they were getting a result. They were getting a good result. So there we'd been using, let's say 8 to 10 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Just remember 8 to 10. Well, these people who are, generally really good were getting a result with 1. Now, the reason they were getting a result with 1 was that when they were administrating the light, there was no blue anywhere. It was red only. Okay, so if you start to mix blue in with it from other sources, it doesn't work as well. So all of this, now I can't answer your question about how many square meters of skin we need, but everything is telling us that what we've been doing so far has been over the top. We can reduce it. Hopefully, we know the time. We know it's got to be a minute. We know the dose is really quite low. When I'm saying 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, that really is a relatively dim bike light. That is not that great. Area, we'll find out, but I don't know at the moment.
If you had to hazard a guess, which would be the most effective area, or would that be?
Well, when you think about retina, when I'm doing the eye, I mean, that's an area like that. That's pretty small, but it shouts. It shouts at the rest of the body. I think we're probably talking about maybe 10 square centimeters. It may be the case that if we cut it down further, we get an effect, but maybe the effect takes a little bit longer to kick off. That's quite possible. There's so many things here. We know it works. We know we get a result. We know that the result can have clinical impact. We haven't honed down yet the real bottom end. Where's the bottom end of all this? I don't know that. From a pragmatic point of view, if I was sitting here, I'd be saying, pragmatic point of view, I don't care. Because I'm already giving you something that's not disturbing your life. It's not inconvenient, and I'm getting an effect. So
switch.
Do I have to worry?
As you said, it's the switch. It's not this sort of dose dependent. An hour is better than half an hour. It's just turning that switch on.
Yeah.
Just as you're thinking, as you're talking, the most studies ever done in the lab have been under blue light. Is that correct?
Well, when people have been doing studies with light, there have been a lot of studies on animals done on blue light, hunting out for damage. Very rarely have they defined the exact wavelength of the light they've used and the exact energy of the light they have used. People go blue. Well, blue is a meaningless term. It just happens to be something that we define because we see this and we call it blue. In actual fact, you've got to give the wavelength. What is the wavelength? You know, if I've got an eagle sitting next to me and I show it one type of blue, it's going to look very different to that eagle than it will do for me. You know, it's just that our photoreceptors are tuned in a certain way. So yeah, there's been a lot of work done on blue light because there is this notion that is correct, although poorly defined, that blue light is damaging. And blue light on its own does you very few favors because it discharges your mitochondrial battery.
So, but is there an argument for surgeries to be done under red light as a result? Is there an argument?
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just sorry. I mean, I was just more just making these questions up because I'm following this tangent. But okay, good. As long as you're okay with that, because it just if the history of the last 100 years, most clinical things, be it surgeries or scientific studies on anything, have been under one wavelength of light. I shouldn't say color, but I wonder if there's any reason to actually change the spectrum of light, and you might change the outcome in surgeries or things that could help. I don't know.
Key one here is one of the early experiments that was done under red light was a NASA study where they were doing something under red light that involved them nicking their fingers. And they found that wounds healed faster under red light. Now, all of the data that we are currently looking at indicate that wounds will heal better under long wavelength light. Now, if that's a pile of rubbish, worst case scenario is you bought a red light. You know, the belief amongst us is very firm that the red light is going to help wounds heal, and the mechanism for that is there. We can understand that because it will reduce inflammation. Now, most of the lighting in hospitals is now LED lighting. It's very, very strong in blue, and it has almost no red in it. And that is a point that needs to be addressed. And again, it's minimum cost, absolute minimum cost. If we can get people out of beds, if we can reduce bed blocking by changing a light bulb, if we can reduce it by 5%, the NHS is onto a winner. Right now, particularly in older people where their mitochondria are underperforming, if we can get those older people out of beds in hospitals by changing a light bulb, that's got to be a winner.
Wow, it just seems like such low-hanging fruit for obviously, you know, this aging population with all these diseases, and if you can, as you say, flip this switch in them and how they live. It seems like quite a low-cost solution that has a load of bang for your buck.
Yeah. So let's get rid of the blue light. Here's another great story. It's a very important story. And again, it bounces back to NASA. So NASA published this big paper with loads of authors, loads of really big names on it. And they said, we have a problem with astronauts on the International Space Station. They are all suffering. They are suffering from mitochondrial decline. And that is being presented in two forms. One is they're showing signs of premature aging. Remember, these people are up there for long periods, and everything they do all the day is being monitored. So they're suffering from premature aging, and they're suffering from pre-diabetes. All these really fit people. Look at the environment. They're all under super harsh white LEDs. Now, the great thing about the NASA study was they excluded the obvious, which is no gravity. It wasn't something to do with that. And they put it out there really as a question. What is going on? But it was a great experiment because it's an experiment where, I can't get hold of a group of people and put them under LED lighting 24 hours a day for months on end. But they did it for us. And that was great.
Wow. Yeah. It's sort of the extremes teach the best, good or bad, right? In that extreme environment, you suddenly have this environment where you can pull those lessons from. So now in NASA, in the International Space Station, do they have red lights everywhere, or
No. I think that perhaps we should also see NASA in its wider context. So NASA is partly run by the military. You don't get all the stories out that you want, but NASA want to unload long-term space flight to private companies. So private companies, they would like private companies to be involved in sending people to Mars. Are they really going to go and tell everybody that these people they're sending out to Mars could get mitochondrial disease? Because they're going to be out to Mars for a hell of a lot longer than the people on the International Space Station. So we've announced it. We've told the European Space Agency about it, and they certainly listened. I don't know if they're doing anything about it, but Bob Fosbury, who was the person who coined the term about red light starvation, he was a leading scientist at the European Space Association, and he is the guy who built the spectrometers on the James Webb Telescope. So he has a lot of profile with them, and I'm sure they're listening, but they're not saying a lot.
Well, okay, maybe some first incentives there. That's
Yeah.
it's interesting. You've got the as with health, often you've got the research and the anecdotal data all sort of screaming, and then you've got public policy just taking a little bit longer to catch up. So, what do you think the catalyst to sort of force some change?
The catalyst is someone listening, and that is why I'm really happy to talk to you, and I will take off any amount of time to talk to yourselves and other people. I need a senior civil servant in the Department of Health or a minister in a health department to pay attention. And I would say, I would emphasize yet again, we have got ethical approval from Moorfields Eye Hospital, from University College. We've had some people taking red light on their own bat for years. There is no health problem. Okay, there is no downside. The only downside to all this is you've got to go and buy a red light. Now, the red lights that you're seeing, that are on the market, I don't know, 100 quid, those lights that you're paying £100 for can be landed UK at $12. Right? Because it's health, they're charging a fortune. In fact, I had to exclude, and story much told, a lovely old lady from a clinical trial. She was great. And I had to say, look, because of A, B, C, and D, I can't include you. And she was a bit fed up with me. And she turned up back on the door about a month later, and she had a battery in her hand, and she had an LED, an infrared LED, and she joined it with her fingers, and she held it up in front of her eye. And she said, Glenn, will it work? I was really taken aback, and I said, well, come and have a cup of tea. And I asked a member of the team to measure the energy and measure the wavelength. And they came back and they said, that'll work. So there is nothing mystical here. There is nothing that requires high tech. There is nothing that requires a vast amount of money. Okay, as I say, worst case scenario, you bought a battery, you bought an LED, and I look like a fool. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, there's this old phrase where there's mystery, there's margin, and I think that right?
Yeah. So we're just not talking about that little old lady and her vision. We're not just talking about people with macular degeneration. We're talking about people. We're talking about diabetic crisis. The country has a diabetic that is costing us a fortune.
Yeah.
Why don't we just think laterally?
Well, the market for my background's health startups, and the market for I guess things to manage insulin better and reduce that glucose spike or insulin spike, it's vast. and
Yeah.
you see more people have continuous glucose monitors, and um, I got pitched a supplement that reduces your insulin spike if you take it with when you take it with food. And actually, well, red light seems to be way more cost-effective solution than that. I mean, just interesting, an interesting tool that no one is really talking about in that spectrum, in that space, which is very, very fascinating. Yeah.
We've got a, we do talk to, we are now talking very, very seriously to architects. I spend most of my time now, not in the medical school, but actually in the Bartlett School of Architecture at
Okay.
UCL. They are firmly, they know what's happening, firmly on board. There's also a number of small lighting companies that are at the cutting edge, specialist lighting companies. And one of the people that run one of those companies put a patch on his arm, walked around, and took red light, and he came back and said, "Glenn, this works." I said, "Yeah, I know it works. How do we get belief? How many papers have I got to publish before someone says, okay, there's something in this?" Or as a
Mm.
good colleague of mine once said, is there much point in publishing, because a lot of people just don't bother to read it anyway. You've got to make a splash, you've got to go in the media, you've got to talk and pick people up that way.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've never published a paper, but I imagine it's you got to have the right product and the right distribution, and things like this is the distribution, right? You got to talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the wonderful thing about these podcasts. Not necessarily this one or this guy hosting it at all, but it's just reduces all friction to get a message out. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about skin complexion and collagen. A lot of questions coming in about, you see all the red light masks specifically for way more than 100 pounds. Is there any efficacy behind that, and sort of it can upregulate collagen and what all these companies claim, or is that?
Well, I don't think they know what they're doing, right? Very few of these companies actually know what they're doing. Very few of these companies will give you any specific data about their devices and what their devices are doing. I would say that the evidence in favour of wound healing and reduction in wrinkles, the evidence is there that something is going on. But when you go and buy your device and you pay some outrageous figure like 400 quid, they don't know how much energy they've got to give you. They've got they don't know the exact wavelengths that they should be using. It's all out there. You can read it. Even more importantly, one of the key things about red light devices is your mitochondria. You can only sort of recharge your mitochondria in the mornings. It doesn't work in the afternoon. Doesn't work in the afternoon because mitochondria do so many different things that, I say to people, look, in the afternoon, the mitochondria are doing the ironing, doing the dishes, doing the other things they need to do in life. So everyone's selling you these devices and they're not telling you they don't work in the afternoon.
Wow. So you have to fall in line with the master clock, which is the circadian rhythm.
The mitochondria have got their own clocks. The mitochondria kick themselves into action. I think it's related to perceived dawn, and they kick themselves into action about half an hour before perceived dawn. And then when they're working really hard, you can give them red light and they'll work even harder. If you catch them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can give them buckets of red light and nothing happens. And that's true in a fly and it's true in a human being.
Wow. Funny, I don't know if there's anything to do with things, but it seems to follow the same diurnal rhythm of hormones. Testosterone is very high and cortisol very high in the morning and fluctuates
Yeah.
down. I wonder if there's a link between.
Oh, I think the link is very much in your evolutionary history when you were waking up, or in Africa, when you wake up, you're extremely vulnerable, very vulnerable. You've been vulnerable for a while. You've been asleep. You've probably been snoring, announcing your presence to absolutely everybody. The saber-toothed tigers have come along. They know where you are. Your testosterone has to be high. Your glucose levels has to be high, and your mitochondria have to be pumping out ATP because you need to be in a super fit state when you wake up in the morning. I think it's all tied into that.
That makes that makes a lot of sense. It's so fascinating where this field goes, and sorry, the wind was blowing my door open. Where this field goes, and I don't know what the next 5 years look like. I mean, from a policy point of view, and sort of the entrepreneurial potential there is here, and which one sort of pushes it forward, I don't know. What are you most excited about in this field?
There are so many things that excite me. So I'll let you know. I'll let you know about one, and it's personal. Okay, we've got children with a very rare disease that is mitochondrial based, and one of the parents asked me whether there was any theory whether red light could be used, and I said, I don't have ethics to do this. I don't know enough about it. I suspect that at this stage, I suspect that you're not going to do any harm. They used red light, and there was a very dramatic effect within 2 weeks. When I saw the pictures, people know I went to the toilet and burst of tears. Now we have a small clinical trial for that. It's a rare disease. That excites me, and I roll over in bed and I think I did something worthwhile today. That's something really worthwhile. Where else does it excite me? It excites me because I go in to talk to groups of people and I say, you've just not paid attention to light. Generally, what light is doing. We have to, and part of the mission that a small group of us have got now is, let's remove LED lighting. There is something in LED, well, we know what it is. It's an absence of red light. Let's go back and find another way of delivering broad spectrum light. So I am going into environments where people are sitting in rooms without daylight, and they're sitting there with LED lighting, and we're carrying out quite sophisticated experiments to test their visual function. And then I'm taking the light bulbs out and I'm giving them old incandescent light bulbs. And I'm going back a week later and we're remeasuring their visual function, and it's better. Now, I'm not measuring their blood sugars. I'm not measuring anything else. But, it seems to me that someone won the Nobel Prize for LED lighting because we're saving energy. And that was a great bit of science, but we didn't realize the consequences. Just didn't realize. If we can get people to go back to a different form of lighting, we're going to improve. It's a public health issue. It's public health. If we can dent blood sugars, if we can dent these problems that are mitochondrial, that are all to do with an aging population, like Parkinson's disease, like macular degeneration, that's great. I mean, I will put a punctuation point at my career if we can get policymakers to pick that one up, because the science is there.
I love your optimism for that, and I hope it becomes a thing. The Matt Ridley wrote a great book of how innovation works, and he makes a good argument for entrepreneurship pushes policy faster than policy can push entrepreneurship, and maybe that's the way to do it. Who knows? What is your personal practice? Because obviously you're so in the literature, and you're publishing literature yourself. What does your personal practice with a red light look like?
My personal practice, and that of most of my colleagues as well. I mean, if you could come in my office, you'd realise that all my lighting is incandescent lighting. My outer lab space is all incandescent lighting. My home is incandescent lighting. When I get up in the mornings, I will very often turn on a red light and just bounce it off the wall while I'm getting breakfast. Or if I miss that one, what I do is I cycle into work and I get into the office, close the door, and start stripping off the kind of horrible sweaty cycling gear. And then I've got a red light that again I'll bounce off the wall. And all of us are doing it. All of us are doing. And the big mistake is to suddenly think, because I'm bouncing this red light off the wall, I've got to have better memory, I'm going to have better muscle control, I'm going to have better this, better that. It doesn't work like that. It just means that in the long run, things are going to improve. Things are not going to go downhill at the same pace that they would do otherwise. And I've struggled like crazy to find a downside. I need something that is a downside, and we haven't found it. We haven't found it at all. And the other thing is, I cycled down the Holloway Road, which is a pretty miserable road in London. But as I'm cycling down it, I'm facing south, and on a sunny day, I'm getting half an hour burst of sunlight.
And would you say that's enough?
I'd say it's a bare minimum. Minimum. He said, I can wheel this technology into a situation and say, here's a light at 850 nanometers. I think I've got a very, very good sticking plaster on a problem. The resolution of the problem is really going outside, just going outside. I mean, another really interesting angle on this is that there is a strong relationship between the development of myopia in children and the absence of red light. The Chinese have, and I'm unsure of the mechanism, but I do believe the result. And it's clear that if you bring kids inside, spend a lot of time in classrooms, if they're doing lots of close work, you're going to develop a myopic problem. And that's enormous in the Far East, Malaysia, China, Japan. And the answer there is sunlight.
My stepdad, he had a detached retina because he was very, very myopic. And
classic.
Yeah. We came across some of the papers in prepping for this, and actually sort of would that have helped pre-retina detach? By all accounts, yes. So
well, it would have helped him when he was a child and he was developing the myopia. Right? Once you're an adult, myopia is when the eye grows too long. Once it's out here, you can't do anything to bring it back here. But you can slow its growth by making children spend more time outside in sunlight. Great study, well, initially a great study done by the Chinese showing that red light reduces the rate of myopia, published relatively recently. The downside was they used a laser. And you should really never use a laser on the retina unless you really have to. And the consequence was some of these children developed retinal lesions. And that is going to hold the field back. There is no reason for using a laser for all of the things that we do. Go and get an LED. It's safe. It's cheap. All this technology should be LED based and not laser based.
Yeah, if there's a downside like that, why would you use it? Just a question on near-infrared light. How is it different from red light, and are there other benefits that can unlock? Is that a whole different field? Or just...
So the wavelengths that people are using predominantly are 670 and above. If you go below 670, the efficacy is reduced. Now, 670 is defined as near infrared. Infrared starts sort of 700 plus. Okay, but this is it's nomenclature. It's about where we're drawing borders. So a device at 630, which is red, it's not near infrared, it's not going to do you any good. Bicycle light probably won't do you any good at all. So, people want a cheap version. The wavelengths tend to be 660, 670, up to about 800 and 850 nanometers. You'll stop seeing the red light at 700 to 750 because your retina is not sensitive to it.
Okay, so my one, I've got one red light and I can see that, and the near infrared I can't visibly see.
Yeah, that's pretty, and it's probably the infrared one that you can't see it's got the bigger kick in it in terms of health.
Right, I see. Okay.
Because it's penetrating your body further.
Okay, right. So we can get deeper. Do you have any opinion on the I guess, I don't know what you call the nodes that you can sort of stick up your nose and they shine a light? And
Well,
same.
yeah, I do, because I had a colleague doing it, and I thought it was the most bizarre thing on the planet. But he had a longer track record in this area of research than I did. And he has been one of the leaders in using red light for Parkinson's disease. And he did all the work on primate models of Parkinson's disease. And his rationale was, well, if you stick it up your nose, it's going to get into your brain really quickly. And of course, dealing with Parkinson's disease, he's actually dealing with a deep brain structure. That was his rationale. I can only say that I hope he washes it when he takes it out.
Yeah, I'm sure, don't we all?
Yeah,
Interesting. Dr. Jeffries, can I just end with some quick fire questions for you, if you don't mind?
sure.
Okay, so one of my favorites. What is the most notable change you've made to your health in the past 5 years?
The most noticeable change I've made, doing 5 to 10 minutes yoga first thing in the morning.
Oh, I needed to hear that.
Okay, that's because I'm getting old. I'm really aware that my back's getting stiff.
Yeah. I think the world needs to hear that. It's easy to neglect
Yeah,
the inflexibility, and it's so boring. But yeah, 10 minutes is
it
now.
is boring. It is terribly boring.
I find it so dull. Okay, and are there any books you can recommend that don't have to be necessarily on lights or mitochondria, but that maybe shape your worldview?
Oh, well, there's a big, thick book called Power, Sex, and Suicide by Nick Lane. That's a bit of an academic. That's a bit of an academic book. But for anyone who wants to dig get their feet into it, then I'd do that. And to be honest with you, when I go home, I don't read academic books.
Yeah,
So I can probably give you a list of novels I'm finding pretty good. But when I look around me, I say Nick Lane's books are very good. They're extremely good. But I'm just reading a John le Carre book at the moment and thoroughly enjoying it.
lovely. You need a bit of both, right? You need a bit
You
of both.
do, yeah.
I've got Nick Lane's book on my bookshelf, and I don't want to start it until I'm convinced I'm going to finish it, but it is daunting.
Yes.
It really is, and actually most of his books are. But I've heard him speak. He seems very he comes across really well. And last question from me: if you could know one thing in your field that you don't know yet, what would it be?
Okay, this is where I'm going tomorrow. Okay, so when we shine when we shine long wavelength light on people's bodies, we get all these changes in the cytokines. All these things are happening, and a physical anthropologist from America, Nate, came in and said, "Tell me about firelight." And I went, "Well, what do you want to know about firelight?" And I said, "Oh yeah, firelight. Firelight's got a lot of long wavelength light in it." And he said, and I think this is really great, "What has firelight got to do with human evolution? Is there a link between firelight, particularly as we move north? Is there a link between firelight improving mitochondrial function and something to do with human evolution?" I find that absolutely gripping. Absolute. When humans came out of East Africa and they moved north, okay, fine, they went to the Lebanon, and they still nice and sunny. They went to Turkey, still nice and sunny. But when they finally ended up in Tooting, it wasn't nice and sunny, right? It was grey, it was miserable, and they had to wear lots of clothing. Is there a link between how we advance in human evolution and our brains advance with firelight? I really want to know that one before I die.
God, I would love to read that book.
I'll give you a call.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Glen Jeffery, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much for wasting your time with this yo-yo over here.
There's no way. I told everybody in the lab, we've got to stop doing science and we've got to start talking, because unless we talk, we're not going to get traction.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'm no doubt the listener will have a great time listening to this conversation. So can't thank you once again for coming on.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.